The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to today's webcast presented by the American Association of Cardiovascular and Pulmonary Rehabilitation. Today's presentation is Assessing Your Registry Data for Quality and Performance, presented by Mark Vitsenda. Mark Vitsenda, he is a Senior Clinical Exercise Specialist for the University of Wisconsin Hospital and Clinics. He has worked for over 30 years as a clinical exercise physiologist and outpatient cardiac rehabilitation, and has extensive experience with rehabilitation outcomes, performance and quality, outcomes databases, analysis of outcomes, and the translation of registry goals to cardiac and pulmonary rehab clinicians. He is the former chair of the AACVPR Registry Committee and is active on the Clinical Applications Committee. He has been instrumental in the development and implementation of the AACVPR cardiac and pulmonary registries. So Mark, we're happy to have you present today. I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thank you, Rob. Well, happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. I hope everyone's enjoying their day so far. Besides all the things that Rob mentioned, I have been a member of the Registry Committee now for a while, and many of you also may have had contact with me as the so-called answer man for many registry-related comments and questions. I am also a registry user. I'm responsible for the data analysis for our program here in Madison. So I'm not only kind of keenly involved with the back-end operations of the registry, but I also use the registry almost on a day-to-day basis. And I just want to go through just a brief overview of the registries first and the importance of our topic today, and that is, assessing and making sure that the data that you enter into the registries is accurate and complete as possible. The registries are really just data repositories or data management systems. They're a way of ordering data and then spitting that data out into some kind of format that makes sense. And it's very important that we put accurate data into the registries, because if we have accurate data going in, we'll be able to use that data and analyze that data and provide some important information about the real-world performance of our patients and our program. So that, accurate data then is valuable data to us and to our daily operations. Or, as we like to say, then we can compare apples to apples. And the main way that we can ensure that we're comparing apples to apples, the number one rule for ensuring high-quality data that goes into the registries is to make sure that we're all following the standardized definitions for each of the data elements. We put a lot of work into defining each of the elements in the registries so that they adhere to either nationally recommended definitions or to expert opinion. And by following these definitions, I think our data will be more accurate and will reflect the true outcomes of our patients. So what I'd like to do today, this is kind of our roadmap, is I'm going to review some of the online data validation features in the registries. I'm going to review some of the reporting features and points of interest in each of the reports. We're going to review how to scan records for completeness and accuracy using the patient list table in the registry. I'll do a brief demonstration of how to use the data extraction utility and how to find records based on certain search criteria. And then I'll also do a demonstration of how we can use the Excel spreadsheets that result from the data extraction utility to calculate some important performance measures, enrollment and completion rates. And what I'd like to do is at the very end, hopefully there'll be enough time at the end that I can entertain some questions or comments. So first of all, let's take a look at the first method that we have of making sure that the data that we enter is valid or not. We have a lot of background codes built into the registries so that the numbers or the data that you put in is filtered or aged for accuracy. And for instance, hopefully you will see green check marks after you enter a data entry. That means that that value is within what we would expect in terms of a range. However, you may occasionally see this red check mark, and the field will turn red. That should let you know that that value then is outside of what we call a hard limit or hard range. And in order for the record to be saved, you'll either need to change the value to something that's more accurate or within the range, or just delete the value itself. Now, if you enter a value and you get a red check, you will be able to go over to the element's header or title, and if you mouse over that title, you will see this tooltip box. And in the box will be the definition of what should be entered into the field. Then you'll also see in a graphic format here the ranges, the acceptable ranges and the unacceptable ranges for that particular field. So the hard limits are in the red range. So any values that are in these red ranges will not be accepted. And you'll have to, again, either change it or delete it in order to save the record. And then values in the yellow ranges are within the what are called soft limits. And soft limits will be accepted. You'll get a little yellow icon saying that asking if you're sure you want to enter that value. But you can leave that value in and the record will be saved. Now, I should let you know that currently the tooltips and some of the other reporting features and things that I'll be showing are only available in the cardiac rehab registry, but within the next month and a half, we hope to have these same features in the pulmonary rehab registry. We're really working at trying to make sure that both registries work and look the same so that there's a consistent pattern between both projects. So again, a yellow icon, if you see a yellow exclamation point, it means that it's not what is expected for that particular field. It may be outside of a normal or expected range of values. For certain fields, it may mean that it's above a certain clinical threshold or cut point, but you can still leave that value in there and still save the record. And I showed this just for demonstration purposes. I get a lot of questions from users saying, well, we're trying to enter zeros for exercise minutes or exercise days, and it's giving us a warning message. And again, if it's a yellow icon, it just means that 0 is outside of the normal goal or what we would expect, but you can still enter that. Now, as an aside, some users have asked why the percentage change isn't calculated. And this is because simply when the intake value is 0, we can't calculate a percent change. So just keep that in mind, that if an intake or admission value for any of these fields is 0, you won't see percent change calculated. Now, the other thing with data validation is all of these features that I've shown are important for the online thing, but if you're using a third-party application to enter your data, you may not get the same kinds of warning messages. However, the programming or code should enforce the same kinds of validation limits that we enforce online, so that the same kind of accuracy is applied to whether you're entering it online or through a third-party application. So use these data validation indicators to ensure that the value you've entered is actually correct. For instance, you entered 1,002 and you meant to enter 102 for the systolic blood pressure. To ensure that the value is within expected limits. Sometimes I get questions from users saying they're trying to enter a certain weight or height and it's not being accepted, and that's because the correct units haven't been checked. Use the mouse over tips to check what the data limits are. If you are getting an error, you can double check the data limits to see what they actually are. And then you can use the validation indicators to check if an entered value requires a certain action. Again, this is especially important in some of the assessment tools that have clinical thresholds or normal ranges. Next, let's go to the registry reporting features. We have a number of, well, 3 main reports in the registries. And again, I'm going to use the cardiac project to demonstrate these features. Most of these features, well, all of the features will be in the pulmonary rehab project soon. I use the reporting features a lot in order to look at data quality and performance in our program. We have 3 main ones: the outcome summary report, the program comparison report, which allows you to compare your program outcomes with those of other kinds of programs, and then the performance report. Now, just a tip here, when I'm looking at the comparison report or the performance report, I almost always use the similar size comparison. And I use that because I think that by comparing to programs that are probably going to have the same types of patients as we do, we'll probably have the same numbers of patients, and we'll have the same kinds of, roughly the same kinds of procedures that we use. I think then the comparisons will be more valid than if I were to use the other comparison types. So let's take a look at each of these reports individually, and I'll tell you how I kind of go through them and what I'm looking for. So first of all, and I usually print these about every 3 months, though you certainly can view them sooner. You can look at, and in some of these reports you can look at smaller time frames. But generally I use 3-month time frames and look at them every quarter. So first of all, let's look at the outcomes summary report. And again, this is just showing your patient outcomes for the time that you've selected. And I'm going to use a demonstration, an example of one. Just remember that all of these reports are only using the records of patients who have been marked as completing the program and whose discharge date is within the range that you've selected. So this will not include the outcomes of patients who drop out or who have not yet been marked as completed. So again, let's look at an example. And what I do with the outcome summary here is I'm just basically looking for numbers that don't make sense. They're either way out of range of what I would expect, or they're much different than what we've expected in our program historically. And I'll first look at the patient demographics and just kind of eyeball the numbers there. And if you notice, in this range, I see that there is 1. And I'm pretty certain we did not have a 1-year-old in our program. So this is something that we're going to have to correct. And I'll show you later how we would go back and correct this. But I'd look at the rest of the numbers, see if they're falling in line with my expectations. Then I would go to the actual outcomes section of the report. And again, here I'm looking just to see if the numbers make sense, if the change is in the correct order. Is it going up or down, and is that correct for that particular measure? And I'll just eyeball through the numbers, and just as an example, I happen to see that we've actually got values in this max METs field. And we actually don't do any entry or discharge tests, so we shouldn't have values for max METs. So here's another thing that we'll have to correct, and I'll show you how we can correct that later also. Next, I'll run a comparison report. And again, I'm just looking for numbers here. And here I'm looking to see if our numbers are roughly in line with those of the comparison group. And again, we're going to use the similar size group to compare to. And I would first look at the gender makeup of our patients in this sample to see if it's roughly the same as the comparison group. And here I see that, well, we maybe have a few more males than our comparison group. Then I'd look at the race makeup to see if we have maybe a higher fraction of minorities. That might affect our outcomes. I'd maybe scan through the diagnostic categories. And here, what I do mentally is I add up the valve repairs, the surgery patients, and the CABG patients. Because these are going to be surgical patients, and as you're well aware, their outcomes, their performance may be different than maybe an uncomplicated PCI patient. So if we have a preponderance of surgical patients compared to the comparison group, our outcomes might reflect that difference. Then I'll look at risk levels to see what their makeup is, and for our program it's pretty black and white. I mean, they're either low or high risk, whereas you notice in the comparison group it's kind of spread equally between the 3 risk levels. And then I always go down and look at how many patients we have with diabetes, because again, these, it will affect our diabetes management performance outcomes, and I want to see if we have more or less than the comparison group. And I'll look at the outcomes section, and again here, I'm just looking to see if our numbers are roughly equal to the comparison group. I'm not really looking for big differences. Of course, if I saw big differences, that might make us question our data, make sure that we're entering it correctly, or that we don't have any inaccurate data. And I generally look at areas or measures where we have some control or maybe some interest. We're doing maybe a quality improvement project, and we want to see if we're having any impact on that particular measure. For instance, I might look at LDL cholesterol. That's an important goal for many of our patients. And here again, I just look at our numbers. Are they changing appropriately? And how do they compare with the comparison group? I might look at exercise behaviors. And again, compare our numbers. They're going up appropriately, and they're pretty similar to the comparison group. Look at changes in functional capacity. That's an important thing and something that we can control. And we're seeing good improvements in MET levels from entry to discharge, and that's kind of on line with the comparison group, though our numbers might be a little higher. I look at the DAISY, which is Duke Activity Status Index, and that's a self-reported measure of functional status. And again, we show improvement from pre to post, similar to the comparison group. Though again, here I note that our numbers not only start off a little higher, but end up a little higher than the comparison group. And the last report I'll run is the performance report. And again, here I always select the similar size so that I can compare against programs that we're a large program, so we would be comparing against larger programs. And just like the previous reports, I would run through the demographics just to see if there's any glaring differences between our program and our comparison programs. And then I go to the performance section. Now there are a lot of numbers here. So what kinds of things do I look at? Let me show you a couple of examples. And again, I tend to focus on those areas that we're either currently monitoring for QI or areas that I think we have impact on that we can control. So for example, the peak MET value, this is the peak MET value that the patient reaches with during cardiac rehab. I first look at our mean value, and then I'm going to compare it to our comparison group. And here I note that we're doing better than the comparison group mean. But then my next question is, well, how does our value for our program compare to the constellation of programs in the comparison group? And then this is where we look at the percentile rankings. Now, ideally, you'd either want to be above or below the median. And so when we look at the median, this is going to be the 50th percentile. We see that, yeah, well, we're above the 50th percentile, so that's pretty good. That means that puts us in the top 50% of programs in the comparison group. And then we want to do even better. We're even in the top 25 or above the 75th percentile for programs. So we can assume then that we're doing pretty well on this particular measure. Let's take a look at another measure, mean wait time. I know many of you are probably monitoring this. This is an important performance measure. We're trying to get patients in as quickly as we can and safely. Here again, we look at our program mean, which is 19 days. We compare that with the group comparison. We say, wow, we're actually doing very well here. So how do we now compare with the constellation of other programs? Now here we want to be faster, so we would compare then to the bottom 25th percentile. We'd like to be one of the fastest in the programs in the comparison group maybe. And here we see, well, we're not making the 25th percentile, nor are we even making the median, the 50th percentile. So we're in the slowest, I guess you could say, 50% of programs for this particular measure. And that might prompt us then to look at our procedures and see, is this something that we can improve? Is this something that had to do, maybe we had a lot more surgical patients during this time period than the comparison group. So by reviewing these values, it'll give you some sense of how your program is doing, where there might be deficits. But it is important to know when to compare to the 25th or 75th percentile values, knowing whether you should be in the bottom 25% or the top 25%. Now, the other thing that I look at is this gray column in the performance table. And there are two numbers in this. The first number is just the number of records from the total query that resulted that had complete data that were used to calculate the value for the measure. Okay, so in this example, we had 72 records that had discharge values in order to complete the mean peak MET average. The second number is called the completion index. And this just represents the percentage of records in the query that N represents. So in this example, we had 72 records that had complete data out of the total of 75 records, or our completion index is 96%. Now, the higher your completion index, the more complete your records are, and then the more accurately that particular calculated metric reflects the outcomes of all the patients in the sample. All right, so let's go back and whoops. So ideally, you'd like to have a completion index of at least 80 to 90% or higher, and this kind of depends on the number of patients in your sample and the particular metric that you're looking at. I think above 80% is a good target to shoot for. So let's take an example, take a look at our report. And so what I'll do is just scan through this. Now look at various areas where we have control and maybe where we aren't doing as well. For instance, blood pressures, I mean, it should be almost impossible not to get a blood pressure on a patient at discharge. We should have close to 100% there, and we're doing pretty well there. I mean, the fact that we're missing maybe 4 patients, I might be able to go back in and see if we just forgot to enter those blood pressures. How about measuring or entering peak MET values and getting exercise behaviors? We're doing pretty well there also. We're missing a few, but not bad. We're above that 80 to 90% target. What about lipids, though? You know, here it doesn't look like we're doing all that well. However, and I'm sure many of you are dealing with this also, is that it's difficult for us to get lipid panels before the patient is discharged. So the fact that about 2/3 of our patients actually have lipids drawn before they're discharged from our program, that's pretty good. And so here, this confidence interval I'm going to say is okay for this particular measure. We might be able to improve upon it, but we also have to know how our program works and our patient population to know whether those values are okay. Now we go down to the PHQ-9, which is our depression screening tool. And here, you know, again, this should be something that we should be able to get on every patient at entry and discharge. But here, a 65% is not good. This means that we're missing over 1/3 of our patients are not completing their assessment tools at discharge. So I think, you know, here 65% would prompt us to kind of look at our procedures and maybe do a quality improvement project. So use the reporting features to assess the quality of your record completion and your data entry. You can get quick snapshots of patient characteristics, gender, diagnostic categories, things like that. And you can look at the general outcomes to check for accuracy. You can check your program performance based on your comparison group. And then by reviewing your data regularly, you can find possible procedural errors that may affect the mean outcome values, and that would prompt either a review of your data or quality improvement project. Next, let's look at the patient list table in the registry and how we have provided visual cues to allow you to quickly assess the completeness and accuracy of your patient records. So the patient list will show all the records that you have entered into the registry. And there's a number of ways you can manipulate this table. You can select the number of records you want to display by using the display count option box. You can filter records on specific criteria using some of the filter options that we have. And you can also resort the records based on the headers by actually clicking on the header titles, and I'll show you how we can use this. So when I'm looking at the patient table, I'm really looking for just general markers that would tell me that something's not quite right. So I might look for program completion if a patient I thought had it completed, or conversely I thought had dropped out, and I see that their record is incomplete. That would prompt me to just check and see if maybe someone forgot to update the record. I might also look at the file status column. If we generally get complete records on patients when they're done, and we see a lot of green check marks in this column, and all of a sudden I see a red indicator, it may mean that, oh, maybe we've missed something. Now for the patient table, there are 4 states that a record can be in. If it's complete, that means that the patient has completed the program and their record has been marked as completed. A dropout signifies that the patient has dropped out and that their record has been marked as did not complete. Not enrolled means that the patient was referred but that did not enroll, and there would be no starting date. And then incomplete. Now an incomplete means that either the patient hasn't yet completed the program, or someone hasn't closed the record yet. They haven't marked it as completed or dropped out. And these are the ones that I especially target when I'm looking at the patient list. So let's take a look at an example. So here again, I would just scan through quickly, look at the records that are marked as incomplete. And then what I do is I go to the start date. And I look, and our program is usually 3 months long. So I would mentally add 3 months to the start date. And if I feel that, you know, that 3-month threshold has been passed, I would then go in and say, well, did we forget to mark this record as complete or did not complete? So really the incompletes, when you look at those record indicators and you judge them based on their starting date, you should ask yourself, you know, is this patient done? Should they be done? Did they drop out? Or did we just forget to do something to close their record? Now the snapshot stats section, I always have a hard time saying that, of the home page, you can also use this to kind of get a sense of the patients in the registry. And if you mouse over, there's actually a 5th state that a record can be in. If you mouse over the pie chart, you may see a little yellow wedge. And this little yellow wedge signifies records that are of unknown status. And that means that you've entered a referral date, but you haven't signified whether the patient enrolled or not. So this would be a way of determining if you've got some records that are in limbo that need to be updated to whether they enrolled. Now another tool that you can use, visual tool that you can use to kind of get a sense of the completeness of a record, is this file status section. And this is on the patient summary page in the patient's record. I've gotten a number of questions about this from users. But the idea or the function of this is to give you a visual cue as to how complete the patient record is based on these various outcome areas. Now we chose these areas because we felt that having an outcome in each of these areas would pretty adequately define a patient and their outcomes in cardiac or pulmonary rehab. Now these aren't required. None of these are actually required, but if you collect this data, this will give you a sense of how complete the record is. So if you get all of that data, you'll get lots of green checks and you'll feel pretty good about yourself. What if you get a red flag? Well, that signifies that either something hasn't been entered in the record yet, or conversely, you may have forgotten to enter something into the record. So if you normally get a lot of green check marks, but you're seeing some red flags, that would indicate that you might want to go back in and just make sure you haven't missed anything. However, a red flag may also indicate that you just don't get that information. For example, we don't use here in Madison, we don't use any of the dietary tools that are supported by the registry. So we're always going to have a red flag for the dietary section, and also, you know, a red check in that file status column in the patient list. But that's okay, because we know that we're not collecting that specific piece of information. So understand the red flags in this file status window. Red flags are okay, but only if you know why they're there. If you don't know why you have a red flag, then you may want to check the record and see if you just forgot to enter something. So what I'd like to do next is let's go actually to the patient list in the registry, and we're going to use the patient list to clean up this error. So remember, we found that we had a 1-year-old on our report, and we don't have a 1-year-old in the program. So let's see how we can fix this. And I'm just going to transition now to our registry. I may have to log back in again because it's been so long since we did this. Excuse me while I just log in again. All right. So here's the patient list table, and again, I'm going to look through this, and I'm just going to, first of all, let's see if we can correct that age. And I'm going to expand the list to show 100 records. Now, what I could do is just use the age column here, and I could just scan through and find a 1, and then correct that record. But we have over 700 records now in the registry, so that would be pretty time-consuming. Another easy way of doing that, again, remember we can resort these records by just clicking on these column headers. So if I click on age, there it is. There's the record where we probably got something wrong. So let's open the record by just clicking on the record. I'm going to go to the demographics section, and there's the problem. We entered a current year instead of the date of birth. So I'm going to re-enter this, and then we'll save that. Let's go back to the patient list. And now when we click on the age, there's no more 1 there, so we've corrected that. All right. Now, how about sometimes I'll see errors in the wait time. The wait time's way off. Now, the wait time is based on the start date and the referral date. And we've got validation rules in place so that you can't enter a future start date. And the start date can't be less than the referral date. So usually when you're seeing problems with wait times, there's a problem with the referral date. So let's do the same thing. Let's resort these records and see if we have a referral date that doesn't look right. And there we go. We have a referral date that's 2004 instead of 2014. So let's click on this record. Now we'll go to the Program tab where this is, and we'll reset the 01-10-2014. We'll save that. And then we'll go back to the patient list. And that should be all cleared up now. All right? Now, let's take a look. I'm going to, well, we can do it this way. So again, remember I said that I often go through the program completion and look for incomplete records. Well, here's an incomplete record. These are just test dates, so they're in the past, but let's say it's been 3 months. This person should have been either graduated or marked as incomplete or did not complete the program. And we go back in their medical records and find, yes, they didn't complete the program, so let's open that up. We'll go to program. As if we forgot to mark this, so we'll mark them as not completing. They didn't complete because of an illness, and we'll put the discharge date down. And that can be almost anything, but we'll put that down. We'll save that, and then we go back to the patient list. And now if we go to Macintosh, oops, we forgot to put the date in, so I forgot to put the date. So let's say it was 01/10/2014. Save that. And back to the patient list. And now that's cleaned up. So now they're marked as a dropout. How about file status? Here's a record where he completed the program, but that we're missing something. Let's look at that and see what it is. Now with the file status, here it says that we forgot to enter, or we didn't enter, a blood pressure at discharge. And if I go back into his medical record, I can find actually did check a blood pressure, so we just forgot to enter that. We can go into the clinical tools and go to blood pressure page, or if you just click on the header for that section, it'll take you right to that page. And then we'll enter the blood pressure. We'll save that. And we'll go back to the patient summary. We now have all green checks, so we're good to go there. Go back to the patient list, and this was WISE, so now we have a green check there. So again, those are some easy ways of just using the patient list to check for data accuracy and completeness. Okay, so use the patient list table to find specific patient records for editing, to quickly check the status of your patient records, to sort records by dates or ages, and to find possible errors in these things, or program status or file status. Now, the last thing I want to get to is the data extraction utility. This is a very important tool to use, not only to find inaccurate and correct inaccurate data, but to look at general program performance, or to do very specific analyses of patients in your program. So remember, in one of our tests or our reports, we found that there was data entered in a element that we actually don't do. So we don't do stress tests, so we shouldn't have values in our max mets. So let's go back to the registry, and we'll see how we can correct that. All right, we're going to use the data extraction. Now, there's two data extraction utilities. There's the basic one, and there's the advanced one. The data, the one that I use the most, almost exclusively now, is the basic one, because here you're going to get all the information on each of the patients that meets your search criteria. Whereas the advanced data extraction, you're just going to get the data that you request, and you may be missing some other things that you forgot to ask in your query. Let's go to the basic data extraction. And to correct that max mets, we have to find first records that actually have that data entered. So we're going to go to the functional assessment, because that's the section where the max mets is. We're going to choose max mets. And you could look at either intake or discharge or follow-up, but I'm just going to try to find any record that has a max mets value. Now, I just want to see if there's any number entered in it. So I'm going to put 0 for the qualifier. I'm going to add that criteria. All right, so this says that of the 298 patients, 5 records have max met values in them. All right, so let's generate the Excel spreadsheet. We'll just go to step 3 here. Now here, the prompts that you get next are going to be dependent on the browser that you have. So I'm using Firefox, so my prompts might be a little different than if you're using Excel, but generally you just want to open the resulting file that you get. It may ask you if it's a trusted source or safe, and yes, it's a safe source. All right, so this is the Excel file that we got. And you'll note 4 worksheets. There's a general information one, which has a lot of the demographic information. There is an intake worksheet that has all of the intake data, a discharge with all discharge and follow-up data. So if let's go to discharge data. Let's scroll across here. Now across the top are your element names. And we're going to look for max mets, which is right here. And lo and behold, there are 4 records here that have discharge max mets value entered. So what we want to do is we're going to select what value that, or what record that is. And we go back to general information, and we have the name of the patient, or we can use their medical record number here. And I'm going to use the medical record number, and I'm going to copy and paste, or just copy that. We'll go back to the registry. We'll go into the patient list. We'll search for that number, for that record. There's our record. We'll open that. We'll go to the functional assessments, and there we go. Someone accidentally entered this information in. So what we do is just take that out. That was incorrect. We'll put that back to select, and then we'll save. And then you would do that with each of the records where you found that particular error. All right. Well, oftentimes, though, besides just correcting data entry mistakes, we want to use the data extraction utility to answer specific questions, especially things like enrollment and completion rates. Now, generally, what I'll do is, if I want to look at the outcomes of patients within a particular time frame, I almost always search using the referral date as a beginning. So we'll go down to intake information. We'll use a referral date, and I want to do just a quarter's worth. Let's say, for purposes of our example today, I'm going to do the last quarter of 2013, and then I'll add that. So we have 96 patients who were referred to our program between these dates. Now, I might want to make this even more specific. Let's say I only want to look at, the hemoglobin or A1C values of patients who were referred during this time frame. So there, I would look at risk factors, and maybe I just want to look at patients who had diabetes. And I'm going to check both those who had type 1 or type 2 diabetes, and I'm going to add that. And so now the 96 patients, 22 of them had diabetes. All right? So that's a way of making your query even more specific. However, for right now, I just want to look at enrollment and completion rates of these patients. So I'm going to remove that. I'm going to generate the Excel file. We'll open that. All right, so here's the records of the 96 patients who were referred during that time frame, and you can check that to go to the referral date field here, column. And typically what I'll do if I'm looking at something specific like this is I'll delete out all of the columns that really don't pertain to my particular question at the time. And so what I'm going to do is show you a cleaned up version of this. So this is a cleaned up version. So I usually keep the last name and medical record number, so if I do need to go back to the registry to look at a record, I can reference it. I'm also interested in their completion status and their enrollment status. And then if I want to do things like program durations or wait times, I'll keep the date columns. Now you've got all the data. Now, you could just manually count all these to see whether they enrolled and how many completed. Or you could use some of the built-in Excel functions. And a lot of these functions are very handy. So for instance, let's first of all just sort these. Okay, so I'm going to click up on this upper left-hand box here. And what this does is select all the records in all the columns. I'm going to go to sort and filter, and I usually use a custom sort. And by having the column headers in the first row, we can click this, and then you can sort by the name of the row. And let's first just go by whether they enrolled or not. Now, you can also sort in ascending or descending order. So if we just leave it like this, this is what we get. So first of all the patients who did not enroll are listed first, and then all those who enrolled are listed next. And we can change that by just changing the sort order if you like. Now we can also double up. We can make multiple sorts. So let's say we want to go first by enrollment status and then by completion status. So we'll go back to our sorting function. We're going to add a level. Now we're going to add their completion. And we'll do the same thing, ascending to descending order. And so now we have first the patients who didn't enroll, and then next the patients who enrolled over here and then didn't complete, and then finally those patients who enrolled and completed. Okay, so now they're nice and ordered for me. I'm going to go down to the bottom here. And so now we need to do some of the basic math of how we figure out enrollment and completion. So first of all, let's count the number of records or patients that we have in this. And again, we could just count them manually, or you can use a handy little count function. This is the count A function. And this just counts the number of records where there's non-null cells. So we're going to go from B2, and we can click and drag if you want. Start here, go all the way down to the bottom, and then enter that. And you'll notice that it filled in the range for us. We have 90 patients. Now we know that only 2 didn't enroll, but how many enrolled? You could do the same thing. You could say equals count A, and our top one is H4 to H91. So we had 88 patients who enrolled. And then how many completed? Do the same thing. Equals count A. I'm sorry, here we can use a count if you want. We can do the same thing with enrollment. Count if counts the number of records that meet certain criterion. So let's say count if we go to D2 through D91, and we want to count the number of yeses in this range. So 66. So we had 88 patients enrolled out of the total of 90, 66 completed. The enrollment rate then is simply 88 divided by 90, or roughly 98%. The completion rate is equal to 66 divided by how many actually enrolled, 88, or 75%. So that's very simply how I calculate these values. And again, once you got the sense of being able to sort and do these simple functions, you can get these numbers very easily. Now, how about things like wait times or program durations. Well, let's look at wait times. Wait time is just simply the difference between the enrollment date and the referral date. So we'll go F4 minus E4, 4 days. And if we scroll down, we can put our cursor on this little black box in the lower right-hand corner. That just expands that function to all the cells beneath that you drag to. All right. Now, just for purposes of, so it's clear, I'm going to go down to those patients who actually enrolled, and we'll go equals F26 minus E26, 18. We'll just pick a few. Whoop. I guess my numbers are different here. And again, we use these values for sampling, so all these are going to be the same, but you should have different numbers. Now, if we wanted to take a mean value, we would simply use the average function of this set of cells, and this would then calculate our mean value. So those are some very simple ways of kind of getting this information out of the registry so that you can look at program performance and patient outcomes. Let's go back here. All right, so use the data extraction utility to do quick counts of records that meet specific search criteria. So you wouldn't even have to download the Excel spreadsheet. You could just look at the numbers based on your search criteria. You can create record sets of records that meet multiple search criteria, and then you can use this data extraction utility to do more in-depth analyses of your patient demographics or outcomes, or more importantly, to look at program performance. And I provided this slide for you. This just shows the main Excel functions that I use a lot to do our program analyses. This is really all that you probably need to get most of the information. So then, to get the most out of your registry data, to ensure that your outcomes are accurate and you're getting a good picture of your patients and your program, ensure that the data that you enter is accurate, that it's complete, and that it is current and meets the program or the registry definitions for best results. You can use the reports to get snapshots of current or past program outcomes, and when you use those reports, look through them. Do those values make sense? Are the values comparable to the group that you're comparing to? If not, you may have to go in and make sure that your data is accurate. Use the patient list to scan for problem records. And again, there I look for things like incomplete records where they should have been completed or they should have dropped out. And then also you can use the file status column to look for complete records. Lastly, use the data extraction utility to really get deeper into your data. And you can use it to find errors and correct errors in your data entry, or to do more specialized analysis of patient outcomes or program performance. Thank you very much for your time today. If you have questions about the registries, you can always feel free to write us, email us at registry@aacvpr.org. We'll try to get responses to you within 2 to 3 business days. And again, some of the things that you saw today will be available in the pulmonary rehab registry fairly soon. So at this time, I guess, Rob, we can take questions. Let me get to the questions here. And I'm just going to page through and see if there are ones that I can answer quickly. Someone asks, under exercise minutes and days, should those values be what the patient was doing before they started cardiac rehab, or what they were doing during session 3, like peak METs? Well, for the intake exercise minutes and days, what we're looking at are behaviors prior to the patient's event. So if you go into the definitions document, it will tell you exactly what to look for and what to enter for the exercise behaviors. The peak METs is the peak MET level that the patient could sustain during their third exercise session or for their discharge session. And I answered that. Completion of forms is a timely process. What kind of process do you have to get data entered? Well, I'll tell you what we do in our program, and this is actually a QI project that we've recently started. If the patient is in one of our supervised groups, we try to give the form to them just prior to their discharge session so that they will take it home and complete the forms and then bring them back for their last discharge session. We've also, part of this QI project, when the patient checks in for their discharge session, they're given the assessment tools, and we give them the initial 15 minutes of the session to complete their forms. And I think that's helped. I think we've gone from 65% to almost 90% completion now for our assessment forms. A user has asked if we have availability of custom fields. No, we don't. This is partly because we don't know what users will be entering into a custom or open text field, and we don't want users to enter patient or protected information that's not controlled by the registry. So that's why we do not have any open or free text fields.